Welcome back to PsychVids. Today we are focusing on the foot in the door technique, how small requests lead to bigger compliance. In today's explainer, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and, frankly, slightly unsettling principles in behavioral psychology. It's really all about how the tiniest, seemingly insignificant yeses quietly reshape our identity behind the scenes and, ultimately lead us into massive commitments that we literally never saw coming.
So think about this for a second. Have you ever agreed to something super tiny, like maybe signing a simple online petition, and then suddenly, a week later, you somehow found yourself agreeing to volunteer your entire weekend for the cause? Or actually, here's a better one. Perhaps you just wanted a quick 7-day free trial and almost without realizing it, boom, you're locked into a recurring monthly premium subscription. It really forces us to ask, why is it so incredibly hard to just say no the second time around? Well, as we're going to see, you aren't being manipulated in the traditional, forceful way you might be thinking of. You're actually just being consistent with who you think you are. Okay, let's break down exactly what's happening here. The foot in the door technique, or FITD for short, is a brilliantly subtle persuasion strategy, and it relies entirely on a very specific psychological sequence. It starts by securing an initial agreement to a minor, almost trivial request. Doing this one little thing drastically increases the likelihood of you agreeing to a much larger related request later on. It's a concept that businesses, marketers, and even your friends use all the time, often without even realizing it themselves. We tend to think of compliance as, jumping straight to the end goal, but it's actually a ladder. Step 1 is that tiny, seemingly harmless request. Step 2 is where the invisible magic happens inside your brain, the identity shift. You stop seeing yourself as just a passive bystander, and you start seeing yourself as an active participant. You adopt a completely new trait. And that internal shift, that is exactly what paves the way for Step 3, the ultimate target request. You see, you aren't just agreeing to a behavior. You're actively shifting your self-perception with each and every step up that ladder.
To truly wrap our heads around this, we have to travel back to 1966. Researchers Jonathan Freeman and Scott Fraser set out into a quiet California neighborhood to run this foundational Stanford University study. They really wanted to see just how far they could push people's compliance in a real-world setting, completely far away from a sterile laboratory environment. And what they discovered fundamentally changed how we understand human behavior and influence today.
So, the researchers approached California homeowners using two entirely different strategies to test their theory. First, the control group. They were hit with a massive, highly unreasonable request outright. They were literally asked to install a huge, incredibly ugly "drive carefully" billboard right on their front lawn, completely blocking their view. No way, right? But the foot in the door group was treated differently. They were first asked to do a tiny, harmless favor. Just display a little 3-inch "Be a Safe Driver" sticker in their front window. Unsurprisingly, almost everyone in that second group said yes to the little sticker.
But here's where it gets wild. 2 weeks later, the researchers returned to that sticker group and asked them for the massive, ugly billboard. The jump in compliance is absolutely staggering, simply because they already had a foot in the door. To put this into perspective, only 17% of the cold control group said yes to the giant sign. But a massive 76% of the sticker group agreed to ruin their manicured lawns with a giant billboard. That is a colossal shift in behavior, driven purely by the fact that they'd already said yes to a tiny sticker just a fortnight earlier.
And what makes this study even more remarkable is that even when a completely different researcher knocked on the door and asked for the second favor, compliance remained incredibly high. So it wasn't about pleasing a specific person or building a rapport with one friendly face. This forces us to ask what actually happens inside our minds when we say yes. Like, why does putting up one little window sticker completely rewrite our personal boundaries?
Well, the crucial point lies in Daryl Bem's self-perception theory. In plain terms, your brain essentially says, hey, I willingly agreed to put up that safe driving sign, so I must be the kind of person who cares deeply about this community cause. We literally figure out who we are by watching what we do. Those homeowners weren't agreeing with the researcher, they were agreeing with their past selves. By accepting the sticker, they had naturally adopted a brand new label.
This ties perfectly into the brilliant work of psychologist Robert Cialdini. You see, we have this deep, subconscious drive for consistency. Saying no to the larger request creates an uncomfortable cognitive dissonance with our newly formed identity. Think about it. If you've just established through your actions that you're a safe driving advocate, refusing the billboard creates a massive mental clash. Our brains absolutely hate hypocrisy.
It is far easier for your brain to just comply again than to deal with that agonizing internal discomfort of contradicting your own identity.
Now, let's pivot from the 1966 suburbs to how this psychological mechanism is seamlessly applied to us today. We live in a highly connected digital age where our attention and compliance are constantly being targeted. The truth is, this tactic hasn't just survived, it's gotten far more sophisticated, and you interact with it constantly in your daily life, often multiple times a day.
Crossing that initial psychological barrier makes the next escalation feel vastly easier in almost every context. For instance, in gaming, developers know you aren't likely to commit to a massive $40 purchase right out of the gate, so initially you're just handing over 99 cents for a tiny aesthetic upgrade. But once you're in, the larger buys feel completely natural. Or at work, you agreed to give a coworker feedback on just one slide. You're just being helpful, right? But suddenly it's, well, since you're already looking at it, can you just finish the deck? That tiny yes laid the groundwork for a major time commitment.
It is absolutely crucial to distinguish this from its psychological opposite, the door-in-the-face technique. That tactic relies on initial rejection rather than building upon an initial agreement. Door-in-the-face is when someone asks for something absolutely huge, gets promptly denied, and then pivots to a smaller concession, which, spoiler alert, was their actual goal all along. Foot in the door is the exact opposite strategy. It doesn't rely on contrast. Instead, it builds powerful momentum through a ladder of little yeses.
Now, neutrally speaking, there is a dark side to this when persuasion crosses the line into exploitation, and people find themselves committed to apps, platforms, or causes far beyond their original voluntary intent. We see this heavily in digital dark patterns, like those tricky cookie consent flows or overly complex app permissions. The decisions feel like they are yours, but your autonomy has been subtly shaped. You're on a slippery slope, where the line between genuine influence and outright manipulation is completely blurred, and your natural desire for consistency is actively being leveraged against you.
So to protect your autonomy, you should regularly pause and ask yourself this vital question whenever a follow-up request is made. Am I doing this because I want to, or because I already said yes once? Catching yourself mid-escalation is really half the battle. If you can pause and recognize the pattern, you can intentionally interrupt that powerful consistency bias before it forces your hand. It essentially brings the subconscious process right back into your conscious control.
You do not owe anyone a large favor just because you did them a small one. So use these defensive strategies to take back control of your boundaries. First, treat that second ask as completely independent from the first. Second, watch out for the sunk cost trap. Just because you gave someone 5 minutes of your time doesn't mean they automatically get 5 hours. Also, when you feel that internal pressure, mentally label it as a step-up ask. And most importantly, decide your limits in advance so you aren't making highly pressured decisions in the heat of the moment.
But here is where it gets incredibly exciting. The very same mechanism that can be used to manipulate you can also completely transform you if you deliberately use it on yourself to build powerful, long-lasting positive habits. You can literally use foot in the door for good. Start with a microscopic commitment, like deciding to do just one single push-up a day. That tiny action fosters identity design. Your brain starts to think, I guess I'm someone who works out now. And that internal shift is exactly what effortlessly leads to achieving major behavior change over time, all without relying on sheer willpower.
Remember, that first small step isn't just harmless, it is directional. It sets the trajectory for exactly where your identity is heading next. So what tiny request are you going to say yes to today, and who will it turn you into tomorrow? Subscribe so you don't miss an episode.